Now that you've had a chance to learn a little bit about the production side of video, you know how to shoot, you know how to light, you know how to get some good audio, it's time to take all those bits and pieces and put them together and do some editing. This is not an editing class, so we're not going to spend a lot of time over all the theories and the concepts and the ideas about editing. What I want to do here is just quickly talk to you about how to get your footage into Premiere Pro, how to do some simple edits, and how to get that sequence back out. But I do want to talk a little bit about the purpose of editing. You have to remember that every edit that you perform has some kind of purpose. One way that you can identify what the purpose is to figure out who's your audience, because the audience watching your show is going to be very dependent on how the project is received based on its editing. Something that is edited very quickly, that quote-unquote MTV style of editing, might appeal to a younger generation, but it may be putting off an older generation. So you kind of have to see what is going on with your audience to figure out how you're going to edit your piece. And one way that you can do that is to go back and look at your script and the objectives that you have outlined in your script from the very beginning. And if you have that script and you have your goals and objectives, that will help you identify the audience and also how you're going to edit your piece. Now, a basic idea about editing is pretty simple. Get rid of all the bad stuff, right? Let's cut out all of the stuff that is not needed. It's really a process of elimination. And we only want to include the shots that are necessary to convey the idea. Before we take a look at Premiere, I think it is really important that we take a moment to talk about project organization. And this is something that happens even before you open Premiere, and something that should happen the moment that you come back from your shoot and you're ready to transfer the files off of your SD card or your hard drive onto a more permanent storage system that you're going to edit everything in. Normally what I do is I start out with a master folder. For example, this one is called Beginning Video Production Fall 2019. And inside that, I will have a project folder. This one is called Script Formatting, for example. You've already seen this project if you've watched the other videos in this series. And inside of this folder, I will create folders specifically for video, a folder specifically for audio, a folder for graphics, and a project folder. Now, under the video folder, anything that is video related, in this case, this clip right here is actually the raw footage that that the camera recorded when I shot this piece. Now, it would probably be a better idea if you would go in and rename these clips. This was all done in one take, so I didn't have to worry about scene one, take two. Although if you were doing a production like many of you have done, where you stop the camera between takes, you would have a number of different video files that you would be bringing into your project folder off your SD card, and you should probably name them scene one, take two, scene two, take three, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That way, going off of your log sheet, you know which takes are the good takes, which ones are the bad takes, and then you can import them into your project. You will see that I even have subfolders in here because I have one called Woman on Porch, and I've got these labeled. We've got one that says wide shot left to right, wide shot right to left, one that's completely out of focus, so I know that there's no reason to import this into the project, and additional ones as this goes on. I also have some video graphics that I'm going to use later on, and that's screen capture footage. So I have all of that stuff inside my video folder. Inside my audio folder, as you might expect, all the audio for this project. Although for this project, I just have the final mix down audio. I might have subfolders for sound effects. I might have subfolders for music. And if I have a standalone voiceover, or if I have audio that is separate from video, that would all go in here so I can keep things really organized. Graphics is graphics. This is where I'm going to put all of my graphic projects. In this case, it is title screens. It is animations that I'm going to use later on in this project. And then, of course, we have a project folder where I'm going to actually save my project for this piece. And the reason why I have a separate project folder is you can see proxy files and cache files and preview files. All this stuff is associated with the project itself. And so I like to just throw all of that stuff into one folder so I don't have to look through it and sort through it, because really, as long as the system doesn't crash, I really have no need to go in and use any of these clips outside of Premiere. So that is some simple organization that you should get in the habit of doing whenever you are working on a project. Let's go ahead and jump into Premiere now. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and start a new project. And I'm just going to call this one Class Example. And I'm going to go ahead and put it into this same folder that I was in before. We will call this one, let's make sure that we are in the correct folder. So I'll just browse to the script writing. Yep, we're in the script formatting folder. I'm going to make sure it's in the project folder for this, and I'm just going to choose that. You do have scratch disks, which are how Premiere and how Adobe uses files and uses RAM and uses a bunch of other stuff. I usually just set all of my scratch disks to the same as the project, and this is why that project folder is so full when you look at it, because it's got the proxy files, it's got captured audio, it's got preview video, all that stuff inside that one folder. For now, though, if you've got it set up just like this, you should be good to go. I'm going to click OK. Once we have our project created, we have a window here, our project window, and we are going to input or import all of our footage. And there are a couple of ways that we can do this. For example, if I just go out here to my Finder, I can go into my script formatting folder, and I could just bring in all of this. I could just drag and drop this entire folder right into Premiere, and it'll import all of the video and do whatever is needed to prepare this video for use in the project. But it's bringing in all of the files from that video folder into this project window. And you can see it created a nice little bin. A bin is kind of like a folder where all of this video is going to appear, or where it's going to reside. So that's one way that I can bring in information into my project. Another way is to just go File and Import. So I'm going to go File and Import. And this time, let's bring in the audio that we're going to need. Now, I don't need everything in here. All I need is this one file. So I'm just going to select this one file and say Import. And this one is going to bring, I think this one brought it in right into the video folder. So I'm just going to click and drag that outside of the folder. And instead, I'm going to create a new bin, and I'm going to use this little folder icon down here at the bottom. I'm going to click on that, and I'm just going to type audio. And I'm going to just take my final mix audio and move it into my audio bin. A much faster way to work with any application, doesn't matter what editing system you're using, whether it's a word processor, whether it's a graphics application, learn to use keyboard shortcuts. And for me, just a Control-I or a Command-I allows me to quickly access the import folder, and I can just go into the graphics and I can pull up all of the elements that I'm going to need. I'm just holding down my Shift key or my Command key to bring in all the clips that I want. And again, I don't have a folder for this, so it might be better before I do that to go down here and let's create another bin, and we're going to call this one Graphics. And I'm just going to highlight this bin, and then we go Command-I or Apple-I, go to my Graphics folder, and again, just bring in the elements that I need for this project, import them, and just dump them right into their own graphics bin. Again, organization is really kind of important, and I know I'm spending a lot of time just on organization and importing your footage, but it's much better to have everything organized in these bins as opposed to having all of your footage and all of your assets all over in one project window, because it's going to make it very hard to find those clips later on. The final thing that we're going to need in this project is a sequence. Remember, a sequence is where we're going to edit all of our shots together to form the longer piece. And there are, again, a couple of ways to do that. One way is to just right-click and select New Sequence. Let's see, New Item and Sequence. That's one way we can do it. The other way is to click on this little paper that looks like it's turning icon, and we can select Sequence from there. And this will bring up a bunch of presets that we can use to create the sequence that we're going to use for this project. Ideally, you want to use a sequence that matches your footage. So if you were shooting on an ARRI Alexa, for example, you would probably want to use one of the presets in here. For this class, we're using digital SLRs. So we're just going to go down to the digital SLR category, drop that down, and I know that we're shooting in 1080p. So I'm just going to pick this digital SLR 1080p 30, and that has all of the aspect ratios, the pixel ratios, the size, the 1920 by 1080, all of that is going to be created automatically for me. And that's going to be a great place to start. But you might be sitting there going, hey, wait a minute. I don't know what I should be using. I shot on a Sony camera, but it's not a digital SLR, or I shot on a JVC. It's not listed here. That's okay. Just pick something that is close enough to what you're working with. And if you bring in footage that doesn't match the sequence, Premiere is really good of alerting you to say, hey, do you want me to change the sequence or do you not want me to change the sequence? We're going to see how this works right now, because while I have my sequence here, and I can give this sequence a name, my video clip here, let's find it. It is this one right here. If we scroll to the right, we can see a lot of information about this piece. And one thing that we'll notice is that this is a 4K clip. I like to shoot a lot of the footage, even though it's intended for a 1080p destination, I tend to shoot in a much higher resolution because it allows me to scale and move and reposition the virtual camera, camera virtually, so that I can get a better composition, or I can use some cuts to move in and move out of the shot. So that's what we're going to do right now, and you're going to see how this works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play through this. Let's get to a point where this works. And I'm going to be working with some proxy footage if I've got my proxy system working correctly. So the other problem with playing this back at 4K is that my computer's a little bit slower. So I'm going to have to lower the resolution and see if I can get this to play back at a decent rate.
In 3, 2.
So when I want to, let's say I want to start with me, the subject, turning towards the camera and addressing the audience. I'm going to just back this up a little bit, and I'm going to tell the system, hey, this is where I want you to start. I'm going to set what's called an endpoint, endpoint. And there are a couple of ways that we can set an endpoint. One way is that we can use a marker right here, this mark endpoint, and that will set an endpoint to our piece. And then the next thing that we will need to do is we will need to set an out point. We need to tell the video where to stop, because I don't want to use this entire track, because I know I mess up a couple of times. But I'm going to just play through this very quickly, and to play
while you're contemplating what fantastic
but I'm going to just kind of fast forward through this a little bit and see where we're at. And again, I'm running a little bit slower.
3 of the most popular are Final Draft, Scrivener, and Celtics. Personally, I like using Scrivener a great deal when I'm writing articles and short stories and novels, as I find the organization and note-taking section of the application invaluable to the way that I work. That being said, Celtics is the application I believe we should use in this course, as it not only allows you to take notes, write your scripts, format them for various types of productions, it also allows you to work on storyboards, develop budgets, plan your shooting schedule, and so much more. While the cost may seem prohibitive for students, in the long run, independent producers...
Now, normally, when you are working with this footage, I know it's playing back rather at a lower rate and a lower speed than what I am used to. I've got a lot of things going on and being recorded right now, so I think that's affecting my playback. But normally, the systems that you're going to use are going to be fast enough to support this type of project and to play these clips back at normal speed. So don't worry about the playback that we're seeing here, because again, this system is pulling a lot of resources at the moment, both recording the screen and trying to play back this 4K over a network.
Producers will find Celtics a one-stop shop for all of your future pre-production needs. Also, this is not a paid endorsement for Celtics, but I will say I have used the service since its launch over a decade ago. What we want to focus on instead are the 5 basic elements of a script that you'll need to use to communicate your ideas effectively to the cast and crew.
Okay, I think that's far enough. I think I found a place where I know where I want this clip to end. And so the next thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to set an out point. And there is the button right here that we can use to set an out point. Another thing that we can do is we can use keyboard shortcuts again. So the keyboard shortcut for setting an in point is I, and the keyboard shortcut for setting an out point is O. So I'm just going to press the O key, and now we have our ins and out points, this one little clip and a much longer clip selected, and we can say this is only the part that I want to add to the timeline. So then we can add it to the timeline, and here in the timeline, we're going to let the sequence know that we want to bring in both video and audio. If we only wanted to bring in video, we could turn off the audio track. If we only wanted to bring in audio, we could turn off the video track. And then all I have to do is simply drag and drop my clip down into the timeline. And because I said that this was a 4K clip and this is a 1080p sequence, we see Premiere pops up and says this clip does not match the sequence settings. Would you like me to change the sequence to match the clip settings? So if you bring in footage that you created a sequence and you weren't sure what the source file is, that's okay, because you can have Premiere change the sequence to match your footage. In this case, however, I want to leave it at 1080p because I know that that is the final destination, even though that this was shot at 4K. So I'm going to go ahead and keep the existing settings. Now, I've added a clip into the timeline. I've got a bunch of blank space here at the beginning, and I've got space here at the end, and I've got my clip that I can hopefully play back a little bit. Now,
spend any time on
to format. Take note right away. You can see that in my preview window, I can see the entire clip, but in the program window, everything is zoomed in, and that's because I'm working in that 1080p sequence. So what I need to do is I need to adjust this video clip, and I'm going to do that by double-clicking to load it back up into the preview window. And then I'm going to go to the Effects tab, and I'm just going to shrink this down to about 55%. If I need to move it around, I now have the ability to kind of reframe a little bit. If I want to make sure that my head is right there in that sweet spot of the rule of thirds, I can do that. It's always better to shrink something down than to zoom something in. You'll maintain your resolution better. So that's just a really quick tip right there. Now that we've placed our first and maybe even our second edit, one thing that we have to worry about is the overall pacing of our project. You know, pacing is where we connect the shots in our sequence, and we can use pacing to create tension or humor, or we can cause it to relax the audience. We can even compress and expand time. And we can control pacing by the very length of each cut and the number of cuts that we have in a certain amount of time. And depending on the scene that we're doing, we can have a number of pacing changes in the edit. If a conversation between two people starts out very, very casual and then gets intense, we might see that editing pace be very slow at the beginning with some long edits, and then suddenly it picks up as the two people start to fight, and then after the argument is resolved, we might go back to a much easier pacing where things start to slow down. The thing about pacing, though, is if you don't have any pacing in your show or in your commercial or whatever that you're doing, you're going to end up with something that's quite boring. And so we want to avoid that whenever possible. Okay, so I want to try to speed this up a little bit. I want to make this video as short as possible for the audience, for the intended audience, who may have a shorter attention span than an older audience, for example. And here I have, right at this spot, I have, as I zoom into the timeline, I have about a 1 second pause between where I finish one sentence and I start my next bit of the sentence. And I want to cut that part out completely. So I'm actually going to split this clip into two using a razor blade. And a lot of these tools and conventions that we use in nonlinear editors come from the days of film editing, where we would literally take a razor blade or a pair of scissors and cut through these clips. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this razor blade to the timeline. I'm going to click that right there. I'm going to click right there. And this part, I'm going to go back to my pointer tool, my selection tool. I'm just going to select this little tiny bit that I don't want, this 1 second piece. I'm just going to hit delete and delete it out of the timeline. Now, this does leave a gap between my two clips. And as I play this back, we're going to
take care of this formatting for you.
That
Three
gap.
of the most popular.
We don't want that. So we can close that gap the easiest way. Simply select that gap and hit delete. But now we have a jump cut. One question that comes up a lot for me is, Stephen, how do I know when to cut? Well, sometimes it's very natural, and once you start to edit, you'll figure out, oh, here are the natural points where things need to occur. But one thing that we should always try to strive for is ensuring that all of our cuts are invisible. The audience doesn't know that. One thing that was kind of beat into me at a young age by my video professors was to never, ever, ever use a jump cut, because it's jarring to the audience. It's suddenly someone moves into another position, and that's not natural. That's not realistic. And so it calls attention to itself and thus is not invisible. I think for YouTube videos, jump cuts have become kind of standard simply because it looks a little more amateurish, and it's become the norm for things that you see in streaming video or online video. But that's not something that I like to do. So I like to cover all of my edits with B-roll if I know I'm going to have a jump cut. But we try to make sure that all of our edits are invisible. One way that we can make our cuts invisible is to cut on the action. So for example, if someone is reaching for a doorknob, we might cut to the close-up of the doorknob as they're turning that handle and pulling the door open. We can also cut when the audience expects it. So for example, if someone shouts, "Look over there!" Wow, that was exciting. And then we never cut away to what the person's supposed to be looking at. It's going to cause a lot of people to go, what? I don't understand what's going on. However, if the person says, "Look over there," and then suddenly we cut to, a man eating lion, a man's cutting there with a steak and eating some lion, then that is a natural edit that the audience is going to expect. The bottom line here, and we're not going to go into a lot of theory. I teach a whole class on editing theories and concepts. But one thing that you need to make sure is that all of your edits are motivated. They have to have a purpose. They have to drive the story forward. They have to be connected to one another in some way, shape, or form. They have to have maybe a visual message. Maybe they have a subliminal message. Maybe they have something else that the director is trying to tell the audience by using these edits. So how can we get rid of this jump cut? Well, one way, as I already mentioned, we could use some B-roll footage. Another way is we can actually zoom in to this shot. We can change the size of this shot. So I've already made another edit here that creates another jump cut. But I think at this point where I am talking, we get to something that's rather important.
That being said,
and so this might be a point where we want to go in for a closer shot, make that motivated edit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and double click on this clip, load it back in. And now instead of at 55, let's go 80. And then I can click on my motion here and reframe this so that as I get to the important part of what I'm saying, we go from a wide shot or a semi-wide shot or a medium shot right into
invaluable
the close-up.
To the way that I work. That being said, Celtics is the application I believe we should.
And I think that works. It seems natural. It seems motivated. There seems to be a reason for that. And after I've said what I need to say, the motivated part, the important part, we can create another edit and we can essentially zoom back out and go back to that medium shot to continue this piece. So here's a very classic style of editing. We start with a wide shot because the audience wants to know where we're at, what's going on. For example, here, even though this is maybe a medium shot, we can tell that this is taking place in an office. And then as the conversation or as things become more important, we can draw the audience in by using a medium shot or even a close shot. In the discussion that we had of two people sitting at a table and we were talking about internal and external reverses, you might start with a wide shot of the restaurant where these two people are sitting or the kitchen where these two people are sitting. And then as the conversation progresses, we might cut away to the over-the-shoulder shots or the external reverses. And then as the tension starts to build, as the conversation becomes more intense, as we're allowing the audience to come and be part of this conversation, then we cut to those close-ups and we cut to those internal reverses as the action gets very heated. And if there's shouting going on back and forth, we can have a very fast pace cutting back and forth between those two shots. And then at some point, they all want to take a breath and we can move back out to the external reverses or a medium shot or a wide shot to reestablish and retell our audience where this action is taking place. That's classic editing. You don't always have to follow this, but as a beginner, you might want to start with that classic editing style. Wide to establish, medium to draw the audience in, and then get those close-ups to really point out to the audience what they should be paying attention to in this scene. like I said, I hate jump cuts. And a great way that we can cover jump cuts is with B-roll. And in this case, because I have my script and I know what is expected in the script, and I have all of my graphics and assets previously created before I came to sit down and edit, I know exactly where I can cut and what's going to cover over these edits so that you don't even see that jump cut there. So for example, now I don't know if this is the exact right spot for this, but we do have this clip of my script software list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down to where this list starts to move. So that's kind of like right around here. And I'm going to set an endpoint with the I key. I'm going to let this go all the way to the end. So if I'm going to use the entire rest of this clip, I don't need to set an out point. But now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag this and drop it on to layer 2 right over this edit. For me, I like to work in layers when I edit video. Some people don't. Some people like to keep everything in a single track. But here's my philosophy on how I edit. Usually my base track, if I'm doing a corporate video, a speaking video like this, the base track will be the performer and everything he or she is saying. Then on video track 2, that's where I'm going to put on my B-roll. And then on video tracks 3 and higher, I will build up all of my graphic assets that will be used in this piece. So when I talk about the Celtics application, or if I talk about Final Draft, or I talk about Scrivener, I want to put those graphics on there, and I can build that in my timeline by just putting those graphics on a different layer. But here we have me talking.
This formatting for you. 3 of the most popular
and we don't even
are
see that
Final Draft
because we go right to another piece of video. Now again, there's something wrong with this video. We have to fix this. We have to cover it up. We have to tweak it a little bit. So I'm just going to double click and again, go to my effect controls. And for this one, I think I'm just going to rotate this clip and I'm going to move it. Again, to move and to be able to use it, it kind of drag and drop here in your program window, you need to select the motion element, and then you can just click and drag over here. So now we have this one little 1-second clip where we go from our wide shot or a medium
for
shot.
You. 3 of the most popular are Final Draft,
clip,
Scrivener,
and then we come
Celtic.
back. But the problem is that clip was so short. One thing that we can do is we can adjust the duration of some of these clips. Now, this is a special effect, and I wouldn't go and use special effects all the time because they do call attention to themselves. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to right-click, and I'm going to change the speed and the duration of this clip. And instead of being 2 seconds long, I want it to be about 6 seconds long. So I'm actually going to slow this clip down by adjusting its speed to about 30%. I'm going to hit OK, and it'll automatically adjust the length of that clip. And now as I'm talking about the hundreds or thousands of different pieces of software that are
Final
out there,
Draft,
we've got
Scrivener,
this nice
and
scrolling
Celtics.
list that goes by
Personally,
that shows you and highlights some of those clips. And so we're going to continue to build a sequence like this throughout our entire project. Now, a couple of other things that we can do to edit these clips. I've shown you how you can cut and split a clip in two and delete the unwanted parts. There's a couple of other things that we can do to edit in this project. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to bring in my title video. I'm just going to drop this right here, and I'm going to zoom out so we can see that we have a lot of dead space here at the beginning. I'm just going to drag this video back here to the beginning. And as I said before, if I want to close this gap, I can just highlight it and hit delete, and it'll ripple delete everything that goes through there. Here we have our opening graphic. And then after about 10 seconds, it transitions right
While you're
into
contemplating what fantastic story you're going to write,
facing the camera. Now, again, we're talking about pacing and how pacing can affect the overall mood and how people perceive this video. And I think 10 seconds for this opening graphic is maybe a little long, especially since we can read script formatting fairly quickly. A good rule of thumb is to be able to read everything twice. And I found that for this particular graphic, about 5 seconds is going to be a lot better than 10 seconds. Unless, of course, we have a really cool musical montage or something that we're going to add in there. So I'm just going to go out to about 5 seconds. Instead of using the razor tool to split this clip in two, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go down, and as I hover over the edit point, the transition between one clip and another clip, you'll see that my cursor changes from this arrow to this this edit clip. And if I click and start to drag to the right, you'll notice that I'm shortening, or I'm changing the out point of this edit. And so now, by dragging it all the way down to my timeline indicator, I now have a 5-second clip instead of a 10-second clip. And I can go in and I can then delete that space, and I've shortened that edit down to 5 seconds. I can also do this the other way. I can affect the edit for an endpoint as well. So this is just going to play through. And I think instead of having this person turn all the way around and face the camera, how about we have this person, let's do it in the middle of the action. It might be a little bit more natural. So maybe someplace like right here, maybe this is the point where we want to come into the video. And so again, I'm just going to hover over this edit point. And this time I'm now affecting the in point of the highlighted clip. I'm just going to click and drag over here. Now there's a bunch of different ways we can edit. Again, this is a super basic. Let me show you how to get your clip in, how to perform some basic edits. And then as you take the editing class and as you progress further, we'll talk about ripple edits. We'll talk about slipping and sliding. There's a whole bunch of other ways that we can change and manipulate and edit this video. We haven't even talked about how do we add in audio. Audio clips are added in the exact same way. So if I want to add in my final mix down, I can add that clip into my timeline. So I've got that going as well. I mean, we can go on and on and on and on with this piece. In fact, I think this piece actually starts probably right about there. But this should give you a good idea of how an edit is done. Let's take a look. Here is the final sequence.
While you're contemplating what fantastic story you're going to write, let's take a few minutes and talk about the proper formatting you'll use on your script. We're not going to spend any time on formatting the page, you know, how far to indent, how big the margins are, and so on, as there are tens and maybe even hundreds of scriptwriting applications that can take care of this formatting for you. 3 of the most popular are Final Draft, Scrivener, and Celtics. Personally, I like using Scrivener a great deal when I'm writing articles and short stories and novels, as I find the organization and note-taking section of the application invaluable to the way that I work.
The final thing that we need to do is we need to export this sequence so we can upload it to YouTube. And to do that, I'm just going to find my sequence in the timeline right here. I'll just use this one. I'm going to right-click on it, and I'm going to go to Export Media. Now, this will bring up the Export Media dialog box. And the first thing that we need to do is figure out what kind of codec we're going to use. And just for this class, H.264 is fine, especially since we're going to upload this to YouTube. And the preset, if we scroll all the way down, you will see that there is a YouTube 1080p preset, which is what you should be uploading this video as. We shot it at 1080p. The sequence is 1080p. Yeah, the video that we export should be 1080p. I have seen some students go in and say, well, this needs to be an MPEG 4, and then they don't know what piece to use, and so then they pick a preset like this, which will create a little tiny postage stamp. I think this 3GPP preset is supposed to be used for cell phones, like the old BlackBerry cell phones. We don't want that. So we're going to select H.264. We're going to go down from the preset, and we're going to select YouTube 1080p video. We're going to click on the output name, and we're going to name this file, and we're going to set the destination where we can find it. Personally, I put this in the same folder as the project. So it's just going to reside right here at the base, and I'm going to click Save. And unless you want to do some additional tweaking, that's all you need to do. This preset is pretty good. There's some other things that we can tweak, but that's a conversation for another time. Then all we need to do is hit Export. While this clip is exporting, a couple of things to keep in mind. How long it takes to export is going to depend on how fast your computer processor is, how much RAM you have, how much graphics, how good your graphics card is, how complex the scene is. If you're exporting 4K footage, that's going to take a little bit longer to process. But I've found for the most part, it's going to be about a 1-to-1 ratio, maybe a little bit longer. For the projects you're working on, especially if you're shooting 1080p, you should be able to export this stuff out in real time. So if you've got a 30-second commercial, it may only take you a minute or two max to export this video. If you're doing something longer, like an hour-long piece, it might take an hour, hour and a half to export this piece. But all you have to do is hit Export, wait for it to be done, rendering, and then you can take that file and send it to your YouTube channel. Okay, there you go. That is a super quick overview of the editing process in Premiere Pro. Hopefully you will go out and find some additional help and resources. Certainly right here inside of Premiere is this help menu, which is very, very useful. There's a lot of good online information right here inside of Premiere that you can go and find help for. There's also some great videos on YouTube. In fact, I've got some other videos that you can go and check out, and a whole lot more to help you get into and refine and make your edits as great as they can be. But hopefully this gives you a good idea of where to start. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I can't wait to see your next project.